I want you to picture something. You're running through a forest at night. It's raining so hard you can barely see 2 feet ahead of you. Your clothes are completely soaked through. Your lungs are burning, and behind you somewhere in the dark, something is screaming. Not an animal, a person. And the worst part, you don't know if that person is trying to help you or finish what they started. That was me, running blind through the Jilin wilderness in northeastern China. No phone signal, no trail, no idea where I was going. My left arm was already burned. The back of my neck felt like someone had pressed an iron against it. And the only thing in my head, the only thing keeping my legs moving, was this single, terrifying thought. The cabin was built for this. Someone built that cabin to keep people inside of it. And I had walked right in. My name is Danier. I was 26 when this happened. And what I'm about to tell you starts about 48 hours before that moment, in the rain, with a fire that shouldn't have existed. You need to understand something about who I was at 26. I was the kind of person my friends described as the one who actually goes. Everybody talks about hiking deep into the backcountry, spending nights completely off the grid, no trails, no other people. Nobody ever does it. Except me. I had been doing solo wilderness trips since I was 22. I knew what I was doing. I carried a map, a compass, a first aid kit, and enough food and water to last a day longer than I planned to be out there. I had never been in a situation I couldn't manage. And that confidence, that comfortable, practiced confidence, is probably the most dangerous thing I brought into those woods. I drove out on a Thursday morning, parked at a service road trailhead on the outskirts of the forest, and started walking. The plan was 3 nights in the backcountry, to Tao Solituji, just the kind of quiet that resets something in your brain. The first day was perfect. I covered about 7 miles before finding a flat campsite near a dry creek bed, set up my tent, got a fire going, ate, and fell asleep under one of the best skies I'd ever seen. I was completely at peace. I woke up sometime around 2 a.m., which was unusual for me. I'm a deep sleeper. But something had switched my brain on. Not a sound exactly, more like a feeling. The way your body sometimes just decides it's done sleeping for no reason. I lay there in my bag, staring at the ceiling of my tent. And that's when I noticed the glow. It was faint, warm, orangish, coming through the thin walls of my tent from outside. Distant, but definitely there. I unzipped the flap and looked out. About 200 meters through the trees, there was a campfire burning. Not a forest fire, not a brush fire, a campfire. The right size, the right flicker. Someone had set up camp nearby. I watched it for a few minutes, waiting to hear voices. Nothing. I figured another hiker had gone to sleep and left their fire going. Irresponsible, but not unusual. I zipped the flap back up and went to sleep. The next morning, I was curious. I packed up camp and hiked in the direction of that fire. It took me about 10 minutes to reach the area. There was a natural clearing that matched exactly where I'd been looking from. The angle was right, the distance was right. I was certain this was the spot. But when I walked into that clearing, I stopped. No fire pit, no ash ring, no scorched earth, no charred wood, no scattered embers, no footprints. The ground was completely undisturbed, pristine, like no one had set foot there in months. I walked the whole clearing twice. Nothing. I stood there for a long time, genuinely unsettled. I had watched that fire for at least 5 minutes the night before. I had seen it flickering, and now the ground looked like it had never been touched. I told myself I had the wrong spot, that the distance had distorted my sense of direction in the dark. I told myself a lot of things, and then I kept walking. Because what else do you do? By midday, the terrain had changed completely. The creek bed fell away behind me, and the ground started climbing. By mid-afternoon I was in a denser, older part of the forest, the kind of place where the trees are so tall and so close together that the canopy blocks out most of the sky and you lose track of time completely. The light in there was different, lower, like dusk even at 3 in the afternoon. That's where I found the tower. I almost missed it. I was navigating by compass, head down, when I looked up and saw it through the trees. It was a fire lookout tower, the old kind, steel-framed, maybe 20 meters high, with a small enclosed cab at the top and a metal staircase that zigzagged up the frame, completely decommissioned, completely abandoned. It wasn't on any map I had. I stood at the base of it for a while, just looking up. The lower railings were bent and rusted. Some steps looked questionable at best, but the structure was still standing, and after 2 days alone in the woods, There was something almost comforting about seeing something man-made, something built. I decided to climb it. I know how that sounds. But the view from the top was worth it. I'm telling you, I could see 4 kilometers in every direction. The whole forest spread out below me like a map, the canopy rippling in the wind. I stood up there for maybe 20 minutes, just breathing. Then I noticed the stairs. Or, more accurately, a section of them was gone. Not damaged, not collapsed, gone. An entire section, maybe 3 meters of staircase, had been removed from about 2/3 of the way down the tower. The bolts were still there, still clean. Whatever had been attached to them had been carefully unbolted and taken away. The gap was jumpable, barely. I made it across, landed hard, kept going. But for a moment at the edge of that gap, I looked down at the forest floor and felt the first real spike of unease on the whole trip. Someone had removed those stairs deliberately. I told myself it was maintenance, salvage scrappers, taking the metal. Any explanation felt better than the obvious one, which was that someone had removed those stairs to make the tower difficult to leave once you were inside it. I filed that thought away somewhere. I didn't have to look at it. And I kept moving. I found a campsite about 1 kilometer from the tower and set up for the night. It was a good spot, sheltered, dry, near a stream. By 9 p.m. I had a fire going and my food eaten, and I was feeling something close to normal again. The fire from the night before, the missing staircase, I was letting both of them recede into the kind of interesting but explainable category that your brain creates on solo trips, because solo trips make you paranoid, and you have to manage that. I was almost asleep when the first tree went down. I don't know if you've ever heard a tree fall in the wild. Not a branch, an actual full tree, trunk and all. The sound is violent. There's this long, splintering crack that builds, and then a crash of branches, and then this massive thud that you feel in your chest more than you hear it. It's terrifying even when you know what it is. I heard it, sat up, listened. No wind, no storm, total calm. A tree just fell somewhere to the south in completely still air. I lay back down and told myself it was root failure. Old tree, it happens. I was almost convinced, too, when 10 minutes later, it happened again. Louder this time, closer, and to the northwest, which was a completely different direction from the first one. I sat up and did not lie back down. 2 trees, same night, no wind, different parts of the forest. There is no natural explanation for that. I sat there running through every possibility I could think of and kept coming back empty. And then I heard the sound. I don't have a good word for it. It was low, continuous. It had a texture to it, somewhere between a groan and a growl, like something was drawing breath from somewhere deep and making noise on the exhale. Not quickly, not in bursts, steadily, for almost a full minute without stopping. I have spent 15 years in the backcountry. I have heard bears. I have heard elk in rut, which sounds insane if you've never heard it. I have heard foxes, which sound like a woman screaming. This was none of those things. This sounded purposeful. I grabbed my flashlight and swept it around the tree line. Nothing. The sound faded, not abruptly, just gradually, like whatever was making it had moved away. The forest went quiet. I laid there wide awake until the sky started to lighten, and as soon as I had enough visibility, I packed up and moved. I needed to find that tree. I found it in about 10 minutes. It was massive, old growth, maybe 1 meter across at the base. The trunk had snapped about 1 meter up from the ground and the whole thing had fallen across a shallow slope, debris scattered everywhere. I walked to the stump and looked at the breakpoint. The wood wasn't splintered the way you'd expect from wind stress or internal decay. It had been torn. There were long, irregular grooves running through the exposed wood, deep ones, several centimeters into the grain, running in different directions. Parts of the bark around the base had been peeled away in long strips, and underneath, the wood had this gouged, shredded quality I had never seen before. Not beaver work, not woodpecker. Something had worked on that trunk systematically, the way you'd work on something you wanted to bring down. I stood there staring at it, trying to make sense of it, and then I saw them. On the ground near one of the fallen branches, a small cluster of items that looked out of place. A blue bandana, a metal carabiner. I stared at them for a second, before my brain caught up with what my eyes were seeing. Those were mine. I checked my pack. Both items were gone, taken from a zipped outer pocket while I slept. Something had been close enough to touch my pack in the night, close enough to unzip a pocket and take 2 specific items and leave them here, 1 kilometer from my campsite, next to a tree it had knocked down. Not to steal them, to show me. I put everything in my bag and ran. I ran for longer than I should have under a full pack. Eventually, I settled into a hard walk, rifle in my hands, scanning the tree line every few seconds. By midday, the weather turned. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, and within an hour, the wind had picked up enough to bend smaller trees sideways. The temperature dropped fast. By the time the rain started, it wasn't a light rain. It was a wall of water, cold and hard, driven sideways by the wind. Lightning was striking nearby. I was at elevation with a metal frame on my back. I needed shelter. Now, I pushed forward through the downpour, scanning both sides of the trail for anything solid, anything that could block the wind. And then, through the trees off to my left, I saw a structure. Small, dark, low to the ground, mostly hidden by the forest, but unmistakably man-made. A cabin. I can't overstate the relief I felt in that moment. I practically sprinted to it, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. It was dim. It smelled terrible. Old ash, and something else I couldn't name. There wasn't much inside. A wooden chair, a small table, a cot frame pushed against the far wall, a stone fireplace clogged with old ash, but it was dry, and it was out of the lightning, and for a few minutes that was all I needed. I stripped out of my wet clothes and lay down on the floor. Pure survival mode. It wasn't until I'd been inside for maybe 15 minutes that I started actually looking around. The first thing that got my attention was the sleeping bag in the corner. It was rolled up near the cot frame, and it didn't look as old as everything else in the cabin. It looked recent, relatively speaking. On the table, there were a few sealed water containers and some canned food, like someone had stocked the place as a base. Interesting. Maybe another hiker used this place, maybe a hunter. I kept looking. Near the door, there were marks on the wall. I thought at first they were weathering damage, but when I got closer I saw they were scratches. Dozens of them, some shallow, some deep. No real pattern. I stepped back and looked at the door itself. Simple latch handle. Normal enough. I opened the door to look at the outside of the frame. There was a metal bracket mounted to the outside of the door frame, the kind designed to hold a padlock, but the bracket was only on the outside. There was no corresponding hardware on the inside. This door could only be locked from the outside. I closed the door slowly and stood there in the middle of the room, not moving. I looked at the window. The glass was still intact, which was unusual for a cabin this old. I walked over and saw why. Screws had been driven into the window frame from the outside, one in each corner, sealing it shut. And around the window frame on the inside there were scratches, deep ones, the kind you'd make if you were trying to pry something open with your bare hands, over and over and over again, with nothing working. I sat down in the chair and stayed very still. Someone had been kept here, not for an hour. Long enough to scratch the walls by the door, long enough to leave marks around the window trying to get out, long enough that it became clear to them that no one was coming. I should have left right then. The storm outside was violent, but nothing inside this cabin was safe either. I started putting my things back in my pack. That's when I heard the scratching, from outside, along the left wall, slow, deliberate, like something dragging across the exterior boards. I told myself it was a branch. I told myself it and told myself it and told myself it. Then two heavy thumps on the front porch, clear and distinct above the rain. I froze. The sounds outside didn't sound like a storm. They sounded like something that knew the layout of the cabin, something that had been here before. I stared at the door. A minute passed. Another, then pressure on the door, steady, heavy, like someone leaning their full weight against it from outside. The latch rattled once, then the pressure released. I felt my heart rate spike into something almost painful. And then a thought hit me so hard it actually made me feel dizzy. Why would someone be circling this cabin in a storm without coming inside? The door isn't locked. There's nothing stopping them. Unless they didn't want to come inside. Unless they wanted me to stay inside. I looked at the brackets on the door, the screwed shut window, the scratches. They weren't trying to keep me out. They were waiting for me to stop thinking about leaving. I moved fast. Everything into the pack. Pack on my back, hand on the door. 30 seconds, maybe less. Then the window shattered behind me. I spun around in time to see something come through the broken glass. I still don't know exactly what it was. Some kind of burning container, and before I could process it, the walls erupted, not slowly, not in stages. All at once, like the wood had been waiting for a spark. The heat hit me like I'd stepped into an oven. The door wouldn't open. He had locked it from outside while I was getting ready to leave. probably while I was frozen listening for sounds on the porch. I threw myself at it, my full weight, twice, and on the second hit the hinges gave and the whole door came off its frame and I went down with it. I scrambled to my feet in the rain and ran. I couldn't see. I was just running, crashing through undergrowth, soaking wet, half blind from smoke, and then something hit me from behind, hard, low, a tackle, and I was on the ground with someone on top of me. He was yelling, I was clawing, kicking, trying to get a hand free, anything. He went for my throat. I got a hand under his chin and pushed. My ears were ringing. The world was narrowing at the edges, and then I got free. I don't know how. I just suddenly had space and I used it. Got up, ran, didn't look back until my legs quit. When I finally stopped, I could see the orange glow through the trees behind me. The cabin, fully engulfed in the rain, which meant the wood had been treated with something prepared. The trap had been set before I arrived. I found a gap under 2 fallen trees and crawled under them and just tried to keep breathing. I made it out. I don't fully understand how. I stumbled onto a trail sometime in the early morning, followed it until I found a road, and the first driver who saw me stopped and drove me to a hospital without asking a single question about what I looked like. 2nd-degree burns on my left forearm and the back of my neck. Smoke inhalation, below the threshold for permanent damage. 3 days in the hospital. 2 weeks of actual pain after that. The police took a statement. I told them everything. The fire with no ash, the staircase with missing sections, the stolen items, the cabin, the attack. I could tell they were filing it in the category of distressed hiker tells a big story, and I don't entirely blame them. I was in an uncharted part of the forest. There was no address to send a patrol car to. I went back through everything in my head for weeks afterward, and here's what I kept coming back to. The fire I saw on the first night, the one with no trace in the morning. Someone had been watching my camp from the very beginning, close enough to make a fire, far enough that I thought nothing of it. They had 2 days to study my routine, my gear, my direction of travel. They had taken items from my pack to show me they could, not to steal them, but as a message, or maybe a test, to see if I'd run. I didn't. I walked into that cabin like it was shelter. I think that's the thing that sits with me most, even now. Not the fire, not the attack, not the burns. It's the fact that I was careful. I had been doing this for years. I knew the risks. I carried a rifle. I had all the right gear and all the right experience. And none of it mattered, because the danger didn't come from the forest. It came from something that understood how I thought. Something that knew I'd take shelter from a storm. Something patient enough to spend 2 days making sure I ended up exactly where it wanted me. I never went back. There's this idea that experience protects you, that if you've done something enough times, you've earned a kind of immunity to the worst outcomes. And in a lot of contexts, that's true. But experience can also make you comfortable in places that don't deserve your comfort. It can make you trust your own read of a situation, even when that situation has been engineered specifically to fool you. Danny Yar, the version of me that walked into that forest at 26, was confident in all the ways that made him easy to manipulate. He saw a fire in the dark and thought, another camper. He saw a cabin in a storm and thought, shelter. He saw a door and didn't immediately ask why it could only be locked from the outside. The thing that nearly killed me wasn't faster or stronger. It was just more patient. It let me make every wrong assumption on my own. That's the part I've never fully gotten over. Some threats don't announce themselves. They wait for you to relax. They wait for you to stop asking questions. They wait for the moment when you think you've figured it out, and then they lock the door.